Batman and Robin by Michael Jan Friedman. Chapter 15. Barbara stood over her uncle and swallowed back her tears. His face was partially masked by a breathing apparatus, a tube going from his arm to an intravenous bag suspended above him. Under his pajamas, a sensor had been attached to his chest over his heart. At the moment, the electrocardiogram machine showed the rise and fall of a relatively normal heartbeat. But with the disease eating away at him, how long could that be expected to go on? Sighing heavily, Barbara pulled her uncle's bedclothes up a little higher. It hadn't taken the doctor long to get the necessary equipment for Alfred to be placed on life support. She supposed it was one of the benefits of Bruce Wayne's being the wealthiest man in Gotham. When his name was mentioned, people jumped. Still, it had been a frightening experience. All at once, Uncle Alfred's pulse had become terribly weak, his breathing so shallow as to be almost undetectable. Her first impression was that he had died. Perhaps, in a sense, she reflected, he had. Without the machines taking over the functions his body should have been performing. Without the intervention of technology, they'd likely have been saying last rites over him now. And where were his friends Bruce and Dick? Why had she been the only one home in Uncle Alfred's time of need? Barbara made her way to her room, feeling drained and battered, lost in grief and bitterness. It had been so long since she'd seen her uncle, so long since she'd made herself a promise to free him from his servitude. To lose him now. Plopping herself down on the bed, she remembered the envelope Uncle Alfred had given her. It was on the antique commode beside her bed, where she'd put it while the medical people were doing their job. Reaching for it, she held the envelope up to the lamp that stood on the commode, inspected it, turned it over in her hands. What was inside it, she wondered. Why had her uncle asked her never to open it? Didn't he know she couldn't resist anything and everything that was forbidden to her? Biting her lip, she wrestled with her dilemma for a moment. Then she gave in to her curiosity and opened the envelope. There was a disc inside, a silver compact disc. "Only family can be trusted," she echoed softly. Well, she was family, wasn't she? Perhaps Alfred hadn't given her his genes, but he'd given her his heart. Crossing the room, she slid the disc into the computer Bruce Wayne had been good enough to provide her with. Then she tried to access the information contained in it. "Access denied," said the computer. Barbara sat down and began hacking the disk, trying to crack the code. Fortunately, she was nearly as good with computers as she was with motorbikes. It would only be a matter of time before she got in. Slumped against the doorframe, Bruce peered into Alfred's room from the hallway outside. He was terribly ashamed of himself. And terribly confused. When had this happened, he wondered. When had his old butler, who had seemed so stable and alert just a few hours ago, sunk so far that he needed a web of supports to keep him alive? Where was Dick? And Barbara? Making his way through the house and up the stairs, Bruce found his ward's door open, and his room empty. Wherever Dick had gone, it seemed he still hadn't come back. The girl's door, on the other hand, was closed. He knocked hopefully. "Barbara?" he called. "Are you in there?" A moment later, the door opened. The girl's eyes were red-rimmed, but she seemed calm enough. In the background, her computer was on. "What happened?" he asked weakly. She knew just what he meant. She told him how Alfred's condition had worsened suddenly, how she'd called the doctor, and how the doctor had set up the life supports. And she told him the prognosis. It wasn't good. Bruce looked at her. "Are you all right?" he asked. Barbara shrugged. "As well as can be expected." It was the same thing Alfred had said when Bruce asked him about his health. He nodded. "If you need me, just holler." "I'll do that," she promised. It seemed she wanted to be alone, just as much as he wanted not to be, but he would allow her whatever she wished. As he walked back down the stairs, he tore away the tie to his tuxedo. If he was going to be alone, he told himself, he'd be alone in the place he felt most comfortable. The Bat Cave. It took him only moments to go down there and seat himself in front of the main computer console, but before long he wasn't looking at the console anymore or the screens that loomed above it. He was staring into the darkness, the shadows, where he saw a younger Alfred with a Bruce in his early 20s. The two of them were working on the prototype for the original Batsuit. Was it his imagination, or had Alfred been even more determined than he was to get it right, to optimize the suit's efficiency without mitigating the terror it would inspire? The memory faded. Bruce smiled to himself. For all its uncertainty, for all the peril inherent in the undertaking, those had been happy times. For both of them, he believed. Lately, he'd had to do some tinkering without his lifelong friend. After all, the threat of Freeze didn't seem eager to go away, and the Batmobile wasn't equipped for every need Bruce could envision. As a result, he'd stepped up the pace on the new vehicles. At this stage of the game, he was perfectly capable of building such things on his own. Still, he craved Alfred's insights and expertise, and his plain, old-fashioned common sense. And not just when it came to machines. "Alfred," he sighed. "I could use your help right now." "Right here, sir," said a familiar voice. Bruce whirled, stunned. Before his eyes, a monitor flickered into life. The words, "computer simulation," flashed a couple of times under a digitized image of Alfred. "I anticipated a moment might arrive," said the image, "where I became incapacitated. As a precaution against such a circumstance, I programmed my brain algorithms into the Bat computer and created a virtual simulation, the one you see before you." Bruce stared for a moment. Then he shook his head in admiration of the older man's genius. "It's good to see you," he told the Alfred image. "What seems to be the problem?" it asked, as if it were Alfred himself. Bruce grunted softly. "You are." The image seemed to stare at him for a moment. "Surely I am not the only cause of your distress." It was true. There was another one. "Women," Bruce replied. The Alfred program seemed to pause. "That does not compute, sir. Would you like to rephrase your reply?" The billionaire mulled it over. It didn't compute for him either, he realized. That was the problem. "First," he said, thinking out loud, "poison ivy had an intoxicating effect on both Dick and me. Tonight, my feelings spread to someone else." "Specify, please," said Computer Alfred. "Pamela Isley. I was so attracted to her I couldn't reason clearly. I still can't." He bit his lip. "She used to work for Wayne Enterprises. Find a file for me, will you?" "Coming online now, sir." A spinning picture of Isley appeared on the monitor. "What was her area of research?" Bruce asked. Study and report titles scrolled up beside the woman's image. "Advanced botany," Alfred responded. "DNA splicing, recombinant animal plant patterns, pheromone extraction." Bruce held up his hand, as if he expected the computer to see it and stop. "Pheromones," he echoed. "Glandular secretions from animals," Alfred expanded. "Scents that create powerful emotions. Fear. Rage." "Passion," said Bruce. He was beginning to understand. "Find the photo of Ivy after the flower ball." A spinning Ivy appeared beside the spinning Isley. "Deconstruct and resolve, Alfred." Schematics of various features, finger and retina prints, height, weight, and so on, were highlighted, analyzed, and compared. Each and every one of them matched perfectly. Bruce grunted softly. "Amazing what a good wig and contact lenses can do. And I thought Clark Kent got away with murder, wearing just those glasses." He knew now why he'd acted like such a schoolboy at the reception earlier, and why his brain felt so muddled now. Somehow he must have caught a whiff of Ivy's pheromone-powered influence, though she had delivered it in the guise of Pamela Isley. Suddenly, alert panels began flashing on the console. Alarms sounded all over the Batcave. "What is it?" asked Bruce. "Apparently," said Alfred, "someone has stolen the bat signal." Barbara peeked out through the crack in her door. Bruce was gone. Where, she didn't know. Maybe out for a walk in the garden. She hated having been so short with him. After all, he had to be hurting too. If Dick was right, Uncle Alfred had been like family to him. But she was close to hacking her way into the contents of her uncle's disk, so close she could feel it. Sitting down at her computer again, Barbara typed another password, the one she'd been on the verge of keying in when Bruce had knocked on her door. It was her mother's name. Margaret. Access denied, said the computer. The girl frowned. She had been so certain her mother would have something to do with it. After all, Margaret Clark still had a place of honor on Alfred's bureau. Wait a second. How had it been inscribed? Not from Margaret, from... Barbara typed in 3 letters. P-E-G. Access code accepted, the computer informed her. Pay dirt. Barbara leaned back in her chair. This had better be one whopper of a secret, she said to herself. Then she hit the required key and the monitor unveiled the contents of the disk. She scanned them, her eyes growing ever wider. Oh my God, she whispered. Oh my God. Freeze screeched his truck to a stop. Behind him, all his cronies' trucks stopped as well. He turned to Bane, who was sitting beside him, only his eyes visible through the slits of his leather mask. And even those were the eyes of an animal, not a man. No matter what they tell you, Freeze said, it's the size of your gun that counts. Bane's bloodshot eyes narrowed in their slits, but he didn't respond otherwise. More than likely, thought Freeze, the man in the mask had no idea what he was talking about. Not that it mattered. He was a tool, nothing more. When he was no longer useful, Freeze would discard him. Looking up, the villain saw the giant telescope of the Gotham Observatory aimed into the night. He waited 17 seconds until the appointed moment arrived. Then he scrutinized the sky above the telescope. Suddenly, a beam of light stabbed the night, piercing a nest of gathering storm clouds. A symbol appeared in the midst of those clouds, the emblem of a bat with its wings outstretched. The bat signal. Then something happened. The familiar beacon turned blood red and the shape within it changed from a bat to a bird. Before long, it was the robin signal that was shining over Gotham. Freeze laughed his empty laugh. So far, it seemed, Ivy had her part down cold. Now it was up to him. As soon as Dick entered the house, he knew something was wrong. It was just too quiet, too somber in the big, echoing mansion. And he had an awful feeling why that might be. When he got to Alfred's room, his feelings were confirmed. For a moment, he just stood there, stunned. Then he went inside. Alfred didn't acknowledge him. He couldn't. He was in some kind of coma, kept alive by the grace of the machines around him. The boy became angry at himself. The old man had been good to him. He should have been there for Alfred, as Alfred had been there for him. Then he realized there was nothing he could have done. Alfred was dying. Bruce had said so. This was only the inevitable coming to pass. Checking to make sure the old man wasn't in need of anything, Dick left him and made his way to the grandfather clock situated in the library. Turning the hands to 10:47, the exact time of Bruce's parents' death, he heard the hidden door unlock. He could have gone upstairs to look for Barbara instead, but right now he wanted to see Bruce. And just as he had known something was wrong as soon as he entered the house, he knew now that Bruce was in his sanctum. Swinging the clock aside, Dick entered the Batcave. A moment later, the clock swung back into place behind him as he descended the stairs. Bruce was sitting in front of the computers. He looked up as Dick came down the steps. "You've seen him?" he asked softly. The younger man looked at him. "What happened?" Bruce explained, relaying the information he had gotten from Barbara. "And I wasn't here. I was off at the dedication." Dick frowned. "Don't beat yourself up. I wasn't here either." By then, he was close enough to get a glimpse of what was on the screen. It was Alfred. But how? A computer simulation, Bruce told him. Alfred programmed it into the computer, knowing he was dying. And that we would still need him, Dick observed, awed by the man's sense of duty. Bruce nodded. Something like that.
"Good evening, Master Dick,"
said Alfred's image. "Hi, Al," he replied hesitantly. The image flinched ever so slightly, just the way the real Alfred would have. Amazing, thought Dick. Absolutely amazing. "I figured a few things out," said Bruce. "With Alfred's help, of course. It turns out—"
"Sir,"
Alfred's image announced,
"I believe we have located the bat signal, or a reasonable facsimile thereof."
A moment later, the program assessed one of the mansion's external cameras and replaced the butler's image with another one. But it wasn't the bat signal Dick saw. It was something else entirely.